Hi everybody and welcome to a Grimdark Future Firefight Battle Report. Dwarf Guild Commandos versus Plague Disciples. Lieutenant Armando of the Dark Brothers didn't like the fact that he should trust anybody else than his own troops. But he was short on men and time. He had just made a quick deal with a squad of Dwarf Commandos that he hoped he could trust. He needed a town to be secured, and intel showed an enemy patrol in the center of the town. He had just dropped the dwarves off in the highest building of the town, and it was now up to them to clean up. The leader of the Dwarf Commandos is a dwarf champion. He is armed with shock hammer and iron pistol, and he has the special ability Battle Lore that gives all friendly units an extra AP when shooting, and they are within 12 inches. Then he has dwarf warriors, one armed with a flamethrower, two armed with iron blasters, one armed with a shotgun, and one with a Rail M rifle, and finally one armed with a shock hammer and a plasma pistol, and he has also a spectrum scanner. All the dwarves are slow. And they face a patrol of Plague Disciples under the leadership of a Plague Champion armed with heavy pistol. And then he has two Plague Brothers, one with Plague Sprayer and another one armed with Plague Sword and heavy pistol, and then three squads of Plague Zombies, and they have claws. The zombies are undead and they are also slow, and all the Plague Disciples have regeneration. The dwarves have been deployed in the central high building of this town. They have been dropped off by the shuttle and are now in position in the building. But they do not know where the enemy exactly will be. On the battlefield, there will be dice from numbers 1 to 6, and then the Plague Disciples will randomly deploy all over the town. So we will deploy the Plague Brothers one unit at a time, beginning with the unit of Plague Zombies, and they will deploy in position number 2. And the next unit of Plague Zombies in position number 3. And the third and final Plague Zombies unit, and they will go to position number 4. And then the Plague Brothers in the same way. First, the one with the Plague Sprayer. He could very well be the most dangerous enemy unit. And then the Plague Brother with the Plague Sword, and finally the Plague Champion. And he goes here. So with all the Plague Disciples deployed, the Champion and a Plague Brother on the right side of the battlefield and the central building, the units of Plague Zombies on the top part of the battlefield, and also here on the left, and the Plague Brother with the Plague Sprayer in cover here in the ruined building in the lower left corner. And as mentioned, the dwarves are all deployed here in the middle, and they will have the element of surprise and activate first in round number 1. So now the dwarves know what they are facing. They have identified the Plague Sprayer here as the most dangerous enemy. And the dwarf with the iron blaster here will fire 2 shots and try to take him out as the very first thing. And he will hit on a roll of 4 because he ignores cover because of the spectrum scanner. And that looks rather good. The Iron Blaster is AP 1 but has an extra AP because of Battle Lore, so 5s will be needed to block, and both of them will fail. So 2 potential hits, but what about regeneration? On a roll of 5 or 6, the wounds will be ignored, but that's not the case here. So the Plague Brother will take 2 wounds and go down with a roll on the wound chart. And it's a 4, so it's out of the battle. A tough move by the dwarves already here in the very first activation. They took out the potentially worst and most dangerous enemy. Now the slow zombies here on the backside of the building will approach. They can rush 8 inches. They are slow, but still they are closer to the building now. And they can be dangerous if they come too close, so the dwarf with the flamethrower here will try to prevent that. He jumps down from the building and fires his flamethrower. It has a range of 12 inches and he has 6 shots hitting on 4s. And that's a bad shot. The flamer only hits once, and the zombies have a defense of 6. And that's a failed defense roll, but they also have regeneration. And, well, the wound is ignored. No harm done. And now the dwarf is on the ground. He is a target for the other group of plague zombies. They can reach him with a charge of 8 inches, and the plague zombies have 6 claw attacks, but they hit on 5s. And they hit a couple of their claws. 2 hits, and the claws are AP nothing. The dwarf will defend on a roll of 4. And no, none of the claws are defended, so 2 wounds to the dwarf with the flamethrower, and that of course means he goes down. And the roll on the wound chart is a 2, so he is stunned, but very, very exposed here on the ground. The dwarf with the shotgun immediately reacts, and he moves down 1 level of the building and fires his shotgun twice at the zombies, trying to thin them out. He has 2 shots, hitting on 4s, and he's not able to do anything. Instead, the plague champion advances to the corner of this ruin, and then he fires his heavy pistol. He has just 1 shot, and he targets the dwarf with the shock hammer and the plasma pistol. He will need a 3 to hit. And he is successful. 1 hit against the dwarf, it's an AP 1 shot, so the dwarf will need a 5. And he fails his defense roll. He is hit once, and he falls over and has to make a roll on the wound chart. It's a 6, so really good shot by the plague champion. He takes out the dangerous dwarf with the shock hammer. And that immediately calls for a response here. The warrior with the Rail M rifle aims at the plague champion. It's a deadly weapon with the magma ability, which means it ignores regeneration. He will hit on a 4, and he hits with a 6. So it's AP 3, and that means the plague champion must defend with a roll of 6. And he doesn't, so he is hit once. And since it's a deadly weapon, the hits will be multiplied with 3. So he is hit with 3 wounds, and that is, of course, the same as his tough value, and he goes down. He will have to roll on the wound chart, and it's a 5, so a total of 8 takes out the plague champion. 1 very, very well aimed shot from the Rail M rifle took out the enemy leader. A heavy, heavy blow for the plague disciples. So who is now in charge? Maybe this plague brother. He shoots at the stunned dwarf, trying to remove him. All it takes is 1 hit, but he's not able to do that. This battle is turning more and more vicious now. Trying to keep things under control, another dwarf armed with iron blaster will move down the building. And now the plague disciple zombies here approach from the left side. They cannot reach the building, but they will be able to in the next round. And now the final activation of round 1 will be the dwarf champion. So he moves to the ground level and targets the unit of plague zombies with his iron pistol. 2 shots hitting on 3s. And he makes them both. And as usual, the zombies will need rolls of 6 to block the shots. And they fail both of them, so now they have to rely on regeneration, and with double 1s, 2 of the zombies will be shot down. It's not enough to remove the unit, though. So that was the final activation of the first round. A lot of action. The plague sprayer was removed and the plague champion, but also a couple of dwarves were hit. And now the plague zombies will get closer and be able to charge and reach the dwarves in the next round. And they will also activate first. And this lonely plague zombie will be the first unit to activate, and he charges into the stunned dwarf, removing him immediately from the battle. So another dwarf commando casualty. And the dwarf champion turns around and faces this group of plague zombies at full strength. He hits with his shock hammer, one attack, hitting on a 3, and he hits without any trouble. It's a shock hammer with the blast ability, so each of the units will be hit once, and they will have to defend with rolls of 6, and they don't, so potentially the shock hammer can remove all the zombies. Let's see the regeneration. The first one, he regenerates. The second one is not so lucky, and the third one also fails. So 2 of the zombies will be removed by the hit from the shock hammer, and the last one can fight back with 2 claws. He will hit on 5s, and one of them will hit the dwarf champion. He has a defense of 3, and again a 6. Solid performance by the dwarf champion. But now the zombies on the backside of the buildings are close enough to charge, so they move up to the bridge connecting the 2 buildings here in the central part of the town, and they will be able to attack the dwarf here with 6 claw attacks. They will need 5s to hit. So let's see. Ooh, that looks very effective. The zombies will claw their way with 4 hits. AP nothing, but the dwarf will still need defense rolls of 4 or more. And he blocks a couple of the claws, but also fails a few, so he is hit and wounded. 2 wounds, and down he goes. Let's see if he can survive the roll on the wound chart. And he can, so he is stunned on the ground, but still in the battle. And the sharpshooter dwarf with the iron blaster, who took out the plague brother with the plague sprayer, now fires at the zombie, and he hits twice. The zombie will come up, or have to come up, with defense rolls of 6, and again it's not able to, but it's able to regenerate 1. Still, that's too much, and the zombie is hit and goes down, and is forced to roll on the wound chart. And he is stunned. You can't keep a good zombie down for long, so he is back up. And the same goes for the dwarf here. He also gets back on his feet, ready for new attacks. And that attack is certainly coming. The plague brother with the plague sword charges, and he decides to charge both of the dwarves at the same time with his plague sword. He has 2 attacks, so he can attack each dwarf once. He will hit with a roll of 3. So the dwarf on the right first, and he will be hit with the plague sword. And what about the other? He is also hit. The plague sword is AP 1, so they will have to roll 5s to defend. Luckily for them, there were no poisonous hits. And the first dwarf fails, so he's hit with 1 wound. So he has a total of 3 wounds now. What about the other dwarf? Can he resist the plague sword? He can. With a roll of 5, he's safe and will take no damage. But the first dwarf with 3 wounds now has a very tricky roll on the wound chart. And with a 5, it's too much for him. He is history and removed. So 1 dwarf will be able to hit back at the Plague Brother. It's only one close combat attack, hitting on a roll of 4. Let's see if he can do it. He can. He hits the Plague Brother, who will defend with a 3, and he also blocks. So he will move slightly back. The dwarf will now activate and move back and fire his Iron Blaster at the Plague Brother. 2 shots hitting on 4s, and he hits with both of them, and they will be AP2 because of the Battle Lore ability of the champion, so 5s are needed to block. And the Plague Brother blocks both shots. He looks tough there on the bridge. Maybe the dwarves are in trouble now. But they still have the dwarf with the heavy-hitting Rail M rifle, and he fires his 1 shot against the Plague Brother. He will hit on a 4, and remember, it's a deadly hit. And he rolls a 6. The Plague Brother now needs a roll of 6, the only thing that can keep him in this match. And what about that? He rolls a 6. He withstands the heavy hit from the rail rifle and stands unharmed on the bridge with his hordes of zombies. And that concludes the second round. Casualties on both sides, but none of the forces are down to half strength or below yet, so they will not be forced to morale tests. The Plague Disciples will activate first. Let's go to the third round. And the tough Plague Brother activates first. He moves to the top of the building because the dwarf with the Rail M rifle has annoyed him just too much now. So he will attack with 2 hits with the Plague Sword, hitting on a 3. And this time he fails miserably with 2 1s. That was his chance, and he failed. Now the dwarf can fight back with 1 close combat attack, but he also fails, so nothing really happens at the top of the building here. And down here, the dwarf with the Iron Blaster has his back against the wall. He fires 2 shots at zombies. He hits with 4s, and he hits with both his attacks. The zombies will have to defend with rolls of 6. That will not be enough to remove the unit, because they are 3, of course, but they fail the defense and they also fail regeneration, so the zombies fall all over the bridge here and leaves only 1 left. And now this single and very optimistic zombie will attack the dwarf champion, and he is not able to hit anything. Instead, the dwarf champion will swing his shock hammer back, hitting on a 3. And just enough to hit the zombie right between the eyes. 1 hit, 1 failed defense roll, and 1 failed regeneration, so the zombie takes 1 additional wound, taking him to 2, but he survives the roll on the wound chart once again and is only stunned. And the cunning dwarf champion now makes a strategic move. He charges the stunned zombie and removes him immediately, and that takes the Plague Disciples to below half strength. And the zombie on the bridge here will charge the dwarf. 2 claw attacks, and none of them hit the target. The dwarf can fight back. They are not close combat specialists, and he also fails the attack roll here, so nothing happens, and the zombie will back off just 1 inch. And now back to the top of the building. The dwarf will aim his Rail M rifle at point blank range at the Plague Brother. And he once again hits with a 4, and once again the Plague Brother will have to come up with a roll of 6 to survive. And this time it's too much for him. He is hit, and that means he takes 3 wounds, And that will be a tricky roll on the wound chart, and he is blasted and vaporized and whatever out of the building. He's just history. And the Plague Disciples are really running out of options now. One zombie can still activate, and it charges against the Dwarf Champion and also hits with one claw attack. But again, the Dwarf Champion is extremely solid. He has fought before, so he swings his shock hammer. He needs a 6, and he is not able to hit. He's just too exhausted now by fighting all the zombies surrounding him. One more Dwarf Commando still needs to activate, so he moves down one level of the building and fires his Iron Blaster against the zombie. 2 shots hitting on 4s, so one of them will hit. And the zombie cannot defend this attack, and it cannot regenerate either, so he takes 1 wound. And even though he might survive the roll on the wound chart, it's still over for him. He's stunned, but he will be removed because the Plague Disciples are forced to morale tests at the end of the 3rd round here. And stunned units are automatically removed and fails any morale checks. So he will leave the battle, and that will mean only 1 plague zombie remains if he passes the morale test. Let's see. And a roll of 2, and the final zombie, well, he just disappears into thin air, leaving the Dwarf Commandos victorious. They have completed the mission, and now they will meet up with Lieutenant Armando. And the lieutenant is very pleased. The dwarves were worth everything he paid, and he could absolutely trust them to get the job done. Now the Dark Brothers and Armando can search the city, and they haven't used any of their own forces to do so. Thanks a lot for watching this battle report. I hope you'll join me for future bad reps.